Hi everyone, I'm Gonzalo Vegaso, I work in finance, and I'm extremely proud to introduce you this afternoon to Mr. Alberto Yépez. He's a fellow Peruvian, and Alberto, it's also, he's the chairman of High Tech. High Tech is the Hispanic IT Executive Council, and this is a group of executives from leading 540 companies that work, in multiple things, and all of these guys are basically IT engineers, CIO type of guys. And he's the leader of this organization, and at the same time, he is a venture partner at Trident Capital. Alberto also has a lot of experience in entrepreneurship. He got a couple of successful companies that Alberto sold. And also he worked in several senior positions at Oracle as a senior VP of security, and also several positions at Apple. So I'm extremely proud to introduce you, Alberto. Thank you very much for coming and for sharing your insights on venture capital in the emerging markets, entrepreneurship, and innovation.
Great.
Thank you very much, Alberto.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone. The topic at hand is pretty broad, and I don't know how to put the best context, and obviously try to make it relevant to the work that you do. I'll give you a little bit of a personal experience of how I got here, so that, I'm sure you're all thinking about, you're in a great company, playing a very interesting role in what could happen in the future. But try also to bring the context of how important is diversity, which is the theme in the sponsorship of this event and this talk, and also what do we mean by innovation? Where does innovation come from? Is innovation only coming from research? Also talk about a little bit about the venture world and why it's so important, and why everybody's trying to replicate Silicon Valley around the world, because it's a pretty unique thing. Even within the US, many places like Boston and Austin have been trying to replicate it, and they've done it with mixed success in other places. And talk about a little bit of efforts that are going on in foreign governments in emerging markets where they're trying to do the same. And then we'll bring the emerging markets theme. So by way of introduction, and I think this will become relevant in the talk, just to share a little bit of my own personal experience. So I'm born and raised in Peru. I was an engineer by training, electronic engineering. And then luck had it, and they gave me the scholarship to come to the United States. Didn't get the chance to pick up the school. It was a Jesuit school, so there are multiple Jesuit universities, and there was one in San Francisco, the University of San Francisco. I was completing my electronic engineering degree in Peru, and I ended up doing electronic physics at USF. But computers were around, so I ended up doing computer science and computer engineering. Within 3 years, I got a triple major. Went on for my master's degree, and Apple came recruiting on campus. And when Apple came in, they made me an offer. I never finished my master's. A lot of you says, well, should I be doing my master's or not? How important it is? Should I get an MBA? A little bit of context of personal experience. This is not a recommendation, but I always said, I should try to do that. But I never finished. I never did my master's thesis. Never got my master's degree, because the opportunity to work at Apple in 1986 was an amazing opportunity. It's right after the Macintosh was introduced. The Lisa was a flop. It was a great machine, but then the opportunity to be in a center of innovation was tremendous. So I spent 10 years at Apple, and it was every 18 months I had a different role. And again, part of the discussions and the reasons you're here, you're interested in trying to figure out how to do innovation, how much you can take responsibility for your own career. Let me tell you something from the outset. You're responsible for your own career. Sometimes we always blame it on the manager. Oh, the manager doesn't recognize me to do this or that or the other. Obviously, there's interest. The company has to get something done, but you also have your own career aspirations. So you always need to look for, how do I diversify my own experience, but also how do I, take the next step? And sometimes we don't know. I remember when I came out of college, I didn't know what I was going to do. I ended up in a networking group at Apple where we had to go develop the network infrastructure around the world. It was a great project because we needed to integrate voice, data, video conference, and consolidate a lot of the engineering networks that we had, a lot of the manufacturing networks that we had. And, it took me places far from Japan to Singapore to Paris, to all the places to be able to interconnect. It was a great time to to be learning a lot of different things. But I remember I always said, I have this engineering degree, and in my particular case, I wasn't a very good coder. I could program, but I didn't see myself programming forever. So what I did was I got more interested in the business, tried to understanding how I could support business and try to use technology to do that. So fast forwarding at Apple, I had the opportunity to move from working in IT, working in product development, working in international distribution, and ended up running programs, cross-functional programs when we were trying to do object technology. I remember it was Taligent, it was a lot of different companies. But all that, again, was teaching me new skills, expanding my network, and was getting to meet a lot of different people and really try to understand what the possibilities were for me. I was very fortunate in companies like Google as well. They always try to identify the people that are trying to take responsibility for their career. And I work with the executive, there was a leadership program, and they handpicked up about 15 of us. And they said, okay, we want to send you to school. We want you to do the MBA, but we don't want you to take the 2 years for MBA. We'll give you an executive MBA. Pick where you want to go. So at the time, given that I've been in high tech for 8 years now, I said, I want to go to, neither coast was an option because too high tech centric. I wanted to go to a place where it was less high tech centric, but also a lot of international business. So somehow I ended up picking up Kellogg, the Northwestern School in Chicago, and that gave me, again, yet another perspective. It wasn't by design, but it would have been easy to go to Stanford or easy to go to Harvard or any other places, but it was a lot of what somewhat I already had picked up given being working at Apple. So the Kellogg experience was a tremendous opportunity, but the word network, the Google Hispanic network, whether they were Hispanic or not, the network, the people that you meet make a big difference in your career. And I remember throughout my career, I always looked for mentors, people that had a little bit more experience than I did, and they actually made a difference for me in order to do that. So you learn and pick up. And do you have a mentor for your whole career? No, you don't. Every time you go to a different level, you tend to associate or work with. Sometimes your manager could be a mentor, but most preferably, you need to do it outside the group that you work with because they gives you a different perspective and holds you to do that. So we're coming now to innovation. Up to that time, I was implementing things that people would tell me. We need to do this, we need to do that, support this project, working within our R&D programs, a lot of collaboration, cross-collaboration with industry, working with IBM, working with Microsoft, working with a number of industries, but not a lot of innovation on my own or trying to create something that could actually change the fact that I work for somebody. So around 95, our industries go to different turns. We're enjoying, this is a downturn. You're not feeling it as much, but in latest statistics in the valleys, we're experiencing about 12% unemployment. In the reality, we're probably in 15 or 18. 12% is the people that are actually claiming a paycheck because they get to do it within a period of time. So we're on these downturns. But oftentimes in downturns, people tend to think about innovation. What can I do differently? And even if I have a job, then take risks. And how do you move beyond that? So in that time, I got the opportunity to leave Apple, and there were a couple of guys that said, hey, we got some technology from Apple. Let's go build this company. So I worked with them for about 8-9 months, and great experience. Learned a lot about myself because sometimes when we're in a big company like Apple, Google, Microsoft, whatever it is, sometimes we wonder if people want to talk to us because we're in Google, we're in Apple, or Microsoft. But when you're outside, do people even care? So you need to build your own confidence that the reason you are here is because you're good, and it's what you know what you do, and eventually when you get out, the proof is in the pudding. When you're by yourself without that infrastructure that you already enjoy, you'll figure out and you learn a lot of things about yourself. I learned a lot when I left Apple that I could sell. I could get people to part with their money because, like in any startup, besides getting capital from venture capitalists, you want to sell your idea, you want to sell the product, and you want companies to be able to give you money for what you do. That's the biggest test, whether what you're doing has value or not. So it was a great experience, but it lasted. It was short-lived because, this is the part of culture, and I don't know in your case, but for me, it's very important to work with people I respect and I enjoy working with it. While it was a great innovative place, I didn't necessarily agree how the company was being run, right? You give choice to people. People can work hard, but you don't tell them you need to come back. There are people with children, and we wanted to work until 12, 1 o'clock in the morning. It's okay if you want to do it, but forcing people to do that wasn't the right thing. So I said, I will move on. So the best way I could do was went back to my former boss at Apple, who kind of warned me. He says, you are going to a space and are going with a group of people that you may not necessarily want to be associated with, but I didn't see it, but he kind of warned me. But he became the CIO of Cisco. And in Cisco, he had a lot of work. It's when Cisco was a small company. This is circa 1995, 95, 96. And Cisco was just starting and spending a lot of money. So he gave me a consulting job. So this is the topic of innovation. So where do you find innovation to happen, right? Either you do it, you come from research institutions and there's new innovation that is happening in green tech and putting silicon into batteries so they can last longer, or looking at different ways of how to do different code generation, et cetera. But another aspect of innovation is when you listen to customers. So in my case, we started with my wife, which was interesting. We started a consulting business in the time which the internet was just taking off. Everybody wanted to figure out how to do business with the internet. And at that time, there was no security, no infrastructure. And, a lot of what people were asking us to build was, can you create an access control and access framework to manage access to these sites so that my suppliers can come in and submit orders, or the people that represent us can do the technical support notes to be able to support our channel. And so we started building this solution for Cisco. Many departments in Cisco, Bain Networks at the time, who was acquired later for Nortel, Oracle, all those became our customers. But in listening to the customer, 2 years after the fact, we had built effectively what it became something called access control, web access control. And it was a centralized management of that. And we said 2 years after that, we had already 50 people working in our company. And we said, do we want to continue to be a services company? Do we want to become a product company? And so what happened at that time, we said, well, product companies get better evaluation. Maybe we can eventually go public. It was an interesting experience. So what we said, we're going to leave all the services business, all the consulting projects, and we decided to move on and try to create this software company. Luckily, we had made our own money, and we invested in the business to create the product. By a year later, that we have put the right infrastructure to create products, product management. It's not just coding, but you try to do. You need to bring all the commercialization aspects of getting the product and clean and repeatable. We actually said, okay, it seems like, and we sold it to 2, 3, Prudential, Chubb, AT&T. So big customers starting to write real checks for us. Our first customer was a university, was Brigham Young University. They paid us $70,000 for our software. But it was interesting that when the big corporations started coming in, then we said, we need VC money. We need to go to venture capital. We didn't know anybody, and if you ever go during this path, you will know that venture capital, it's an enabler because they give you money and infrastructure to grow the company. But it's always important to get introduced by somebody else that gives you the not only the audience, so that you can sell your idea and eventually people could invest money. So making a long story short, in 97, we raised our first round of financing. We raised $4.5 million. And not only just raised it from here, we actually did a lot of business in Japan. And actually, we got Japanese companies to invest, companies like Mitsubishi and large venture funds in Japan. Because, the VCs here in the U.S. wanted to, for very little, wanted 50% of the companies. Come on, we already have customers, we have that. So we decided to take the approach of taking Japanese money, but also work with some VCs here. Actually, Eric was an investor indirectly in our company because at the time he was in Novell, he created a venture fund. And Novell invested in our second round. They led the second round, which was the next year. We were growing really, really fast, so we consumed the $4.5 million. We raised $6 million the next year, which was in 98. In 99, we raised $15 million of equity, and then short of going public, we raised $42 million because at that time, to go public, it was fashionable to go and say, I'm going to give you equity before you go public so that when we go public, then everybody makes money. It was the bubble. And then short of finishing up our investment, the $42 million round that we did in the year 2000, with wonderful companies as investors. We had Singapore Telecom, we had Telia in Sweden, we had Fujitsu, we had a lot of companies like Novell and others here in the U.S. Accenture was an investor, so everybody wanted to get into the action because the company was supposed to go successful. So at that time, we were supposed to be public, and a public company came in and says, "Don't be public. We want to buy the company." As a founder and as an entrepreneur, one of the worst things you can figure out is this is my baby. I'm not going to let it get to you. But when they offer some interesting returns, especially to the investors, when you bring the investors, this gets a little complicated because they give money in order to get more money to pay the people that give them the money to invest. So at that time, while it was an interesting decision, it was a great transaction for everybody. We sold the company for $1 billion in April of 2000, and we were set for life. Didn't necessarily left the company, decided to stay and try to help the combined company to do that. It was interesting. The bubble, the market crashed. Eventually had to work with a combined company. Ended up running the combined company for a while. It was a Canadian company. Recruited a new CEO, went back to the board. And in 2001, after a year of being with them, I left my operating role there and became more of a director. I was recruited by a firm called Warburg Pincus as an entrepreneur in residence. This is the term entrepreneur in residence is somebody who's been in the industry, that's created a business, that can come into the venture capital group to become an advisor to evaluate investments and say, okay, do you think we should be investing here, there? And eventually they want to interest you so that you can go run the companies that they invest. So Warburg Pincus is a venture fund that manages about like $35 billion in investment. So it's a big one of the big ones. I never knew of them. They recruited me out of the blue. And anyway, I started working with them. I remember really well, it was September 1st, 2001. And we had big plans to consolidate the industry, aggregate, create big companies because of the ideas that we thought we could continue to work on. But 10 days later, the world changed. It was September 11, and the financial markets completely crashed. While we still had money to invest, there was a misalignment in terms of expectations. Since the market crashed, the valuations of public companies went down, the valuations of private companies went down, so nobody wanted to invest. So it was a very tough time in our industry. Like I said, we have upturns and downturns. But it turned out that with Warburg, we couldn't create a deal. Warburg was well known because they created BEA. BEA, again, was another entrepreneur, 3 entrepreneurs from Sun, Bill, Ed Scott, and Alfred Chung, the BEA. And actually, Warburg had invested in them, and they made multiple billions of dollars in the return. But they wanted to repeat a BEA, but it was not, the timing wasn't there. Right after that, I was recruited by Bain Capital, which is another large venture firm, to become executive chairman of one of the companies in New York. I lived in the Bay Area for the last 27 years. I never moved, but I started commuting back and forth New York, remotely trying to help manage a company. Eventually, they convinced me to become the CEO of this company, which was in the identity management space. And when I became CEO, which was around April of 2003, of course, we needed to recruit the team, complement entrepreneurs. At that time, I didn't create it. It was somebody else's, but I had to partner with them to make it successful. Very interesting experience. And after 2 years of hard work and labor, Oracle came around and says, look, we need this type of technology. We'd love to buy the company. So again, I was involved in another transaction where Oracle paid a significant amount of money. I signed a non-disclosure, so I cannot tell you the price, but it was a great transaction. In that case, my team stayed at Oracle. Everybody's having pretty senior roles. They're running significant pieces of the company. But as you see, innovation and entrepreneurship often leads to wealth creation or new ideas, and sometimes you think as an entrepreneur you can take it. There's very few Googles in the world where you can go and take the business and your vision beyond that. But a lot of times you see a lot of in the news, in the trade news, a lot of companies get acquired. That doesn't mean they were not successful. Actually, they were very successful, and because corporate America right now, because the market valuations are going down, it's not investing in R&D. It's pretty sad, but we're losing our edge in the United States because we cater a lot of our financial performance based on how much profit do we make, or we don't lose money. Therefore, innovation, venture capital, and all that begins to think through that either you become a successful company, become a public company, and create a lot more solutions to change the world in a way that whatever you're trying to create, or as an innovative small company, you take it to a certain level, and there's other companies that can take it to a different level. For instance, in the last experience that I had with Oracle, of course we will continue to be successful, but within 6 months, Oracle took a business that was less than $20 million into $200 million because they had the reach, they had the relationships, they had, automatically we became, access to all the Oracle customer base. So again, entrepreneurship, value creation has different perspectives, and there's different degrees of success. At the end of the day, as engineers, we want to create something that a lot of people use, and you can say, do you see that? I was involved with that. But at the end of the day, also, you do these because you have a paycheck, you're happy, you eventually have a family, you want to have your kids, you want to send them to college is expensive, and so you have to have the means and ways to be able to get to that. So there's an interesting correlation of why you do innovation and entrepreneurship. It's not only just to create value, but at the end of the day, it's also to create a certain level of financial independence. I wouldn't say it wealth, so that you can do more things that you like without having to worry about the future. Anyway, and now, fast forwarding all this time, another venture group recruited me to become a member of their staff, and now I'm looking at investments in a number of areas, clean tech, mobile computing, etc. So that's the context. That's why I'm here to talk to you about it. And in the context of Hispanic is, I'm originally from Peru, and like you, I remember we were very eager to figure out, we looked, how in the Valley, the Indian community is very supportive of each other. They created a Thai group. The Asian group also created that. And Hispanics were falling behind. So I remember when I was at Apple, we created a group that was called AHA. It was an Apple Hispanic Association or something like that. After I left that and have done the first successful company, I remember there were a bunch of Hispanic entrepreneurs that wanted to come together and try to share ideas, best practices, introductions to VCs. And we decided to found a group called Hispanic Net, which is a group right now with about 3,000 or 4,000 Hispanic engineers primarily. They're looking to to talk to other people that want to be able to do startups or do innovations, and it's actually centered here in the Valley. After starting that, I moved on, and very late, as of late, I was approached by this group called High Tech, which is primarily executives in Hispanic organizations. They really wanted to say, look, people talk about the glass ceiling, right? Minorities and women tend to never be recognized, never get into the boardroom, never get to the executive roles. And it says, wouldn't it be great to come together? We have a lot of influence. We have people from Procter & Gamble. We have people from large global organizations. Say, let's network together. Let's help each other. Let's worry about professional development, executive development, and how do we move forward. So all throughout, talk about the network and the concept of what you're trying to achieve. So diversity is an edge. It's not an excuse. There's I never led with, oh, I'm Peruvian and I'm Hispanic and you need to let me into Stanford because there's a quota for diverse students. Never did that. I know that there's quotas even in certain businesses, even government, to do business with minority companies. Well, that's interesting because it gives chances for a small business they're trying to grab. Don't use it as an excuse. Use it as an advantage. The fact that we're diverse, we see things differently. We have different cultures. We bring things that sometimes being in an environment, you may not see it from their point of view. If you look at just the general demographics here in the United States, the influence of the Hispanic population, the diversity has made this valley specifically what it is. Diversity with some of the academia and also the venture capital. So what I was saying, in the context of diversity, I think it's something that you should feel very, very proud of what you have and the perspective you can bring in. But please do not use this as an excuse because you're good enough to do it because of the context that you have. So a long introduction, but I think I cover a lot of the salient points. So the next few slides will just be reinforcing the themes. So diversity is important because you have a, I guess you care, you bring a global perspective, but I think one of the things about these type of groups in general is that we care about mentorship, right, or sponsorship. I talked about throughout my career how important the role of a mentor is. You're in different stages of your career. You may be in the stage in which you need a mentor, but don't forget that when you get to a point, especially sometimes you bring interns from colleges, they're never been exposed to these type of cultures. Try to make an impact, whether they stay here or not, or they move on, they'll remember. And mentorship is something that you should always, feel privileged to be able to receive, but also something to give. So never forget, and always the theme of giving back. One of the reasons why I decided to join high tech, I said, look, I'd be willing to help you, be willing to open my network, be willing to do that and act as a mentor of many of you, but don't forget to give back. What is your you giving back to your community? Gonzalo tells me that the group goes out and works with K-12 schools, and you can do a number of different things. One thing that we should try to figure out is how to get you connected with the other groups, Hispanic groups that are within the Silicon Valley, which are very active, and I'm sure we can still make a difference in our community. But the context of giving back, because it's cultural, because we care, is very, very important. So in summary, that's kind of the perspective on diversity. I talked about innovation and just trying to make the points. A lot of innovation comes like with Google, different way of doing searches, and you can figure out different ways, and you have the 20% of time that allows you to think differently and try to figure out what can I do differently that people can use and care. At the end of the day, you're trying to figure out if it's something that is not being done and you can do it, or is being done in a very inefficient way. Most of the time, government-sponsored research gets to universities, and a lot of interesting breakthroughs come. So the biggest innovation and step forwards tend to come from research, so there's no question about it. But the incremental innovation comes from listening to customers. And I would tell you that a lot of companies, even companies like Oracle, they're not very innovative. Okay, you need to automate that, I can do that, or I can buy a company that does that. But, Oracle is doing pretty well. You had companies like Apple on the other end. It was a great lot of innovation. We hit the wall. We tanked at that time, but then refocus on trying to say, well, is the operating system, is it the machine, is it the iPod? So eventually you start figuring ways in which is not, how can I do things differently, and how can I enable new business models? I think some of the great things about the iPhone is not just the device, is the network, the app store, is the micropayments, is the network of developers, and the way it's changing the world. And the incremental steps they go through the operating system and the services is making it a very unique, different platform. Of course, you have Microsoft, you have here as well, the different wireless platforms. But I think the bottom line, the world continues to be mobile, and we want to be able to have a lot of information to consume. So it's either research or it comes from listening from universities. So where do I see? One of the questions that I was saying before preparing the talk says, where is venture capital looking for money, or where innovation is coming, or people looking for innovation? I would tell you that besides the logical ones, healthcare, because of the Obama administration, is taking a big topic, and our healthcare system needs a major rehaul. You know how inefficient it is, how much we had to pay for a doctor. It's just amazing when you walk into an emergency room. By the time you're done, it's like a bill for $20,000, $30,000 where they just came in and gave you an antibiotic or whatever. Bottom line is we need to rehaul that, right? It's not that innovation may have been done in the devices, but in the cycle time of processing a patient, in the cycle time of getting the medical records, in the cycle time that you deal with payment processing and insurance, that's where you're going to see a lot of, I wouldn't say breakthrough innovation, but there's going to be a lot of step functions where the country is going to be able to save a lot of money, and companies are going to be able to save a lot of money. So again, innovation is a context of either something completely different out of research, out of academia, or something that you could actually come out from just simple needs that require efficiency. Therefore, expect a lot of innovation in healthcare. Some of the interesting things with healthcare, with mobility, some of the interesting demos that were done in the Apple Developers Conference with the iPhone is the fetal monitor being displayed in an iPhone, because it wasn't just the operating system, but the ability to bring the signals and create the fully integrated environment. So again, green tech, I won't talk. You know that that's a major focus, because we need to figure out how do we become more efficient in our use of energy. But in particular, something that I can talk a lot about is cybersecurity. I always used to tell people, because I've been in venture business, I've been in building companies, I used to always go to New York, because New York had this huge concentration of financial services, telecommunications company, media companies to go sell stuff. Where do I go more often than not now? I'm going to Washington, D.C. Why? When you start talking to people in NSA and the CIA, our country's at war. Many people, oftentimes we read the paper and we say, oh yeah, we got attacked by the Koreans in the 4th of July, and we cannot let it be. There's not a single day, there's probably not a single hour when one of our critical infrastructure sites or presence in the internet is getting attacked. The technology innovation that has been in that area is good enough to deter the attacks. But they're going to continue to come, and the volumes are going to continue to. So by definition, there's a lot of new thinking about how do you deal with cyber terrorism, and how can you make the United States and our allies a way in which we can be more effective in dealing with that. So while the context of innovation before in security and cyber terrorism has been more of a defensive move, now we're getting in the offensive. So we're getting a lot of vectors to determine where the attacks are coming from, and be able to immediately respond and target the places that they're actually attacking us. Therefore, either you say, look, don't bother me, because I'm serious about not only defending myself, but I'm going to attack you. So when I cannot give you a lot of detail, but the most innovative startups that I've seen in the last 6 months has been in this whole general area of cybersecurity, cyber warfare, because it requires a lot of computing power, a lot of thinking of identity, how you deal with identity. The devices that are coming in are not the devices where the attack is being conducted. There's central command of places. There's a lot of infected machines that may be inside. There's very funny things they never get to see light, but I just got attacked by Goldman Sachs. This is what I mean. One of the infected machines attacked my business. Therefore, liability should be going with Goldman Sachs. If I made you lost money or brought your site down, law says that if it's something that came from Goldman, it must have been Goldman, but it wasn't. It's been somebody that connected and started the attacks from companies that are inside the U.S., but the reality that those start from different places. So if you're looking for areas where you think would be interesting to apply a lot of computer science principles and just human computing interaction and just psychology, that's an area that is still, it's like gaming. I would tell you cyber warfare is probably an area that, we will be seeing innovation for the next, many years to come, because it's a complex problem, it's a real problem. Government is spending a lot of money, and not only a lot of money in academia, but in trying to enable startups in the area, because what we have is good enough to defend, not to be offensive and try to deter it. So, and of course, the other innovations that come in is not often from technology, but how you deliver that. People talk about SaaS, cloud. You guys deliver a lot of it there, but even that thinking required to do that. But it wasn't until the computing infrastructure, the bandwidth, the computing power, the storage became cheap that we were able to do that. People would thought about that. Oh yeah, was the mainframe. We're back to the mainframe where there's a centralized place somewhere in the cloud. I didn't know that. But again, it's how all these different innovations come together to enable different models of computing, different models of consuming information, different models of of selling that or buying that type of technology. That's why you hear a lot about SaaS, a lot of focus on cloud computing infrastructure. And this is today is probably one of the cheapest times to start a company, because you can sign up with Amazon and you can have a full computing environment for what, $1,000 a month, $2,000 a month, which before a computer would have cost you that, because they only charge you on the usage of the time and the usage of the storage. So I think you see that innovation again doesn't necessarily just come from research and ideas, but even business models and delivery mechanisms. So a little bit about venture capital. We're in a very interesting time in our industry. It's a tough time because, in an essence, venture capital is an agent. So people want to give money to a group of people to invest, and those groups are called venture partnerships. But the people that put the money, they expect the money in return. It's like, you put it in a bank, you get a certain interest, you expect it. But in venture capital was always the idea of saying, can you identify the next Google so that we can get the returns? Because the capital markets had kind of imploded, the valuation of companies have gone down significantly. Venture capital lives and is successful when they produce returns to the investors into the venture groups. And of course, how do you make that money is when a company either goes public, there's liquidity in the funds that you actually invested, or when the company gets acquired. So I think we're going to see a major shakeup in our industry. I would predict that probably 30% of venture firms will not exist in the next 18 months or so. And the reason being is that the limited partners, which are the investors in venture groups, are basically saying, well, I haven't received any money, and it's been 10 years since I give you the money. It's not a liquid investment. Instead, I have different asset classes. For those of you in finance, you can invest in different things to diversify your portfolio. And venture is not such an attractive place right now. But, again, we live in cycles, and I think there will be an interesting time for the venture capital community again. And so why is so unique about venture? Oftentimes you get people with operating backgrounds like myself. They start, listen to some of your ideas, and we like that. We take the risk, and let's go build the company. And besides the money, what we bring is a number of relationships and other people that we know. Oh, I need somebody that's good at that. Okay, see if you like each other, et cetera, and helping build a team, et cetera. So that's the role of venture capital. And I think we're very fortunate, especially here in Silicon Valley, because we live in a very special place in the world, because many places have been trying to replicate this model, like I said at the beginning, and they have not been successful. Governments have been very aggressive in putting programs, money, people, hire advisors, assistants. It hasn't been successful. The magic here is, I guess, people are willing to take risks. They work in big companies. They grow up. They tend to, this is the next stage of learning beyond academia. And eventually you decide to take your own risks and decide to go move on and create that. So I think it's the ecosystem that we build, not only with money, entrepreneurship, the culture, and I think just the general infrastructure about even the lawyers, the accountants, they do understand how to structure these type of companies, so then when and if they get to a public stage, there's certain returns. So it's pretty unique. And I know next talk here in this series you'll be talking to Jorge Zavala, who's sitting in the front. He represents TechBA, which is a technology business accelerator. The government of Mexico has invested a lot of money. He's trying to invest on startups in Mexico to try to access the U.S. market. But you don't have that bridge that can take you there. So innovation is happening. The problem is, how can I create that same infrastructure exists in the Valley so that these companies get to access different, not only the market, but grow to a point in which they can go public or they can get acquired, et cetera. So you'll get to see, and I'm sure Jorge will give you a lot of detail. And so in that context, I don't think that this is something that is going to be that important unless you start deciding to start your own company. But in the diagram, we have the typical sources of funds. Venture capital is not often the first place you start. It's maybe almost the last one, Because the beginning is an idea. You invest your own capital. You start your idea. And eventually, once you get that, you start with the founders, the friends and family. Friends and families and fools. There's the three Fs usually that tend to bet on you. And then after you get that proven, then there's an angel network. And again, this is another one of those things about the Valley that is so unique. We have a very active angel network. I'm an active angel. And when I see entrepreneurs, I like something, I tend to give money early on, and venture capital comes in, and some of them, I would tell you the majority don't go anywhere, but there's 2 or 3 that make it through, and it makes it worth it. Just it doesn't matter. And then after the angel or the early stage VC comes the traditional venture capital group that basically is the one that has more formalization. So just to give you a perspective, and then there's private equity, which we won't talk about it. More statistics. Let's move on. A little bit about emerging markets. Because I know this was a topic that people were interested in. So we don't own, sometimes being in the Valley is good and bad because we think we own all the wisdom in the world. We don't. Innovation, just because of different dynamics, is created just because of being there. When you look at innovation, for instance, in the mobile environment, you just need to go to the Nordic countries, you need just to go to Korea, you go to Japan, you go to China. Yes, because the infrastructure there is newer. They didn't have the legacy of the United States. There are leaps and bounds beyond where we're at. You know, Skype came out of the Nordics, right? There's a lot of technology where you see different pockets of areas in the world just because of the fact that they live where they live and the infrastructure is different. Innovation is coming through. So, you know, I think, you know, it depends on your interest. There's pockets in the world where you will see innovation coming through. Right now, a lot of the urban design innovation, which I don't know how much of you love architecture and new communities and planned communities, both India and China the governments of India and China are creating these communities. I was with the group at Cisco a couple of weeks ago, and they are building these communities of the future, where the whole place is an automated place. Everything is networked. Everything is controlled by computers. And this is a model design, besides green technology, besides measuring the consumption, besides turning on all your digital media, et cetera, from just the computing power and the ability to access information, they're trying to do it at a scale. So they're creating very aesthetic architecture and very pleasing environments, often outside the main urban areas. But I would say that, you know, you should just go to some of the communities of the future that Cisco is building. I know there's some projects as well where Google is involved. But urban innovation is happening just because of necessity, because they have the density of population and the fact that the middle class is growing in India and in China, where you can actually begin. There's wealth, therefore we can cater to that, but instead of just trying to do it one at a time, why doesn't the government partner with technology businesses to change the way we should be living? Just not because this building existed that way and we retrofitted and put the panels on top. Is there a different way where when you just build and everything is already insulated, has the right consumption? It could be measured, could be different things. So again, think through that. Innovation can come from anywhere, and based on your interest, try to figure out what it is you can deal with. Now, specifically in the context of Latin America, because some of you come from the environment, you know, it's interesting because I've been personally involved with several of the initiatives that several countries have been trying to foster innovation. I would give you the example of Chile. Chile has been a very progressive country, and because they had the wealth with the copper, they put a tax of every ounce of copper that they sold, and they created an innovation fund, a venture fund. It was about $200 million to invest in companies in Chile. Unfortunately, Chile is, you know, a small country, doesn't have a lot of, you know, maybe schooling. They make a big effort to come to the Valley every year. They talk to different people, but you can see how government is proactively trying to create innovation, but it's not just the money. People say, oh, we just need to get venture capital, somebody that has venture capital to bring it into Chile. It's beyond that. It's the academia, is the thinking, the business environment that will allow you to do that. So they're still pretty active, trying to move forward. One of the places where I was blown away in terms of innovation and the role of government was a very small country in Latin America called Uruguay. Uruguay has 3 million people total in the country. There are 3 main industries. They deal with forestry because they have a lot of wood. They have a lot of horses, and there's the second one. And the third one is technology. And there's centers there where they do a lot of development for wireless applications or mobile applications. A lot of work focused on Microsoft. I was invited by the president of Uruguay. It was Oracle, Cisco, IBM. We were 3 or 4 speakers there. And it was interesting how government was taking a very proactive way of creating an industry to help the country. It's a small country, 3 million people, but you could see the technology business accelerators, the different places where you could create. And they created some innovative companies. Some of them have been bought or they tried to get to the markets. Argentina has done a lot of work in call centers, and there's a lot of people that are moving because there's the talent exists there. But at the same time, it's just a role of government to be able to do that. I would tell you that even the government in Singapore offers you today, even to you and me, if we decide to put a center in Singapore, they will pay for 50% of all the developers, and you tell them which kind of developer do you need, and if they don't have it in the country, they'll recruit it from anywhere in the world, and they'll do that for the first 2 years. Why? Because they want to bring innovation into Singapore. The government is being very proactive to be able to do that. I guess the message here is a lot of innovation happens outside the United States. People want to come to the United States because we're pretty much the largest IT market, consumers of technology. The second largest market of consumer of technology is Japan. We always think of Japan as a little island. Second largest aggregate IT market consumer is Japan. Even though they've been going through certain, flattening of their market, Japan, as in aggregate purchases, is second only to the United States. Things are changing. China is beginning to evolve and consume a lot of technology. India is coming through, but we always think through the G7, the G8, or we think, Europe is the second largest market. What do you mean Europe? Europe is a loosely coupled association of multiple countries, none of them having the power of purchase the U.S., Japan, and now India and China are coming in very fast to being consumers of that. So all the time when you also create innovation, you need to figure who I'm going to sell these to and which are the most important markets to be able to deal with. So again, think through where the innovation can come from and the role of government to encourage innovation. I think that's the last slide that I had. So I kind of ramble through a lot of topics because there was no general theme. But I think if there's some departing thoughts is we're really lucky. We live in the Valley, City, Google. You should be working right now. You're listening to somebody that kind of tell you a little bit of his life story, but also tell you that it's possible. Companies like Google create a company like Google often is the exception, not the rule, but it's not impossible. It's because the environment that you live, and a lot of it is taking the risk. Take the risk. Especially here, there's an environment where rewards the fact that innovation is something that we want to live and try to take the United States or just in general to the next level, because most of the innovation came from people that came in to study and decided to stay here. So I think it's risk-taking. The fact that you are we are the diverse is something that you should value and encourage and network, spend that time, build a network, and just be open to the global nature of the opportunities that we have at hand. And I think you are in a place where I know the company is very supportive and has multiple programs for you to gain different insights. And again, your career is your responsibility. It's not the company's. That's something that you need to take a proactive role. Look for mentors. Will not be the same mentor all the time. You'll graduate from mentor to mentor every 2-3 years. But there are people that will make a big impact in your life. Now we have questions. Any questions? Yes. I think the question for those of you on the phone is who do you see be the biggest promoter of that innovation, so that not to lose the edge of the United States? Whose responsibility is that? You know, I think the responsibility lies everywhere, right? Of course, the government has to take some proactive role, but I think the government does. You know, the U.S. has a lot of, unlike many countries, we have things that, you know, like the internet, it was part of a government research, right? It was a grant that was given. We have the NSF, the National Science Foundation. A lot of the innovation that you're seeing in clean tech is coming from the Department of Energy, et cetera. Right now, because we felt that we're falling behind all these TARP stuff, and sometimes we hear the negative things about how Wall Street is taking these and giving bonuses. The positive part of all these is the fact that government is taking a proactive role to try to get jobs to stay in America. It doesn't mean that everything has to be staying here, right? We hopefully we're the creators, the designers, and you can implement it anywhere else, right? Because maybe there's bigger scale and maybe more economical ways of delivering things. But I think it's a combination of government, it's a combination of education. I think the biggest risk that we face as a nation is our school systems. Not, I wouldn't say our higher education. I would tell you it's our K through 12. That area is in big disarray. If there's an area that requires more innovation than ever, and that we can make a huge difference, it will be that. Because if you say if you measure students for proficiency, who you think are the best students that score in the world? Singapore. Singapore is number one. Every year they score number one in math, and sometimes China, but Singapore is consistently there. They don't have innovation. That's why the government is trying to figure out what to do. In our place, we have some innovation, but you know, our school system is, especially in the K through 12 environment, is pretty in shambles. And why? You look at, you know, every time you go to school, it says we don't have money. Where's all the money going? It's going to the publishers. 67% of the money goes to the book publishers. I don't know if you went to school here or not, but you know, I didn't, but I had children that actually did. If you go to public school, they give you two books. One book for you to stay and the other one for home. 67% of the budget that goes into education goes into book publishing. You guys are changing the world, because this whole issue about, you know, books, open source, big time. We need it, because the moment we reduce the budget that goes to books, that money is going to be available for more computing. And even the government even steps in. I think the ratio in K through 12 of computers to kids is like 1 to 3. So it's not like there are no computers or there's no internet. Even the government is paying for that. The big issue is you have all that, but our teachers are not trained. So I would tell you that besides government and what it takes in trying to drive, you know, innovation in the green technologies and research, I would say that I wouldn't say it's government. Government is supposed to be us. We all have to take a proactive way in which how can we continue to contribute so that our educational systems become more and more effective. If you see the competition that exists in China and India to get to the top schools, and the amount of money that Chinese parents and Indian parents spend in tutoring so that they can get to the top schools, it's amazing. Almost 33% of the discretionary spend goes to tutoring, and they move the kids around so that they can get to be the best tutor, so that they can get to the best schools and eventually get to innovate. We are really fortunate. We have a lot of academic institutions, and they have tremendous resources when it comes to higher ed. But when it comes to K through 12, we're facing a big crisis, and you know, we need more vocations for teachers. But again, the system has to fundamentally change just because of where the money is going. So I gave you a broad view answer. I think it's our own responsibility. Government has a role, but there's some fundamental things that we need to solve before we can continue to edge. And then you know, government, the Congress right now is trying to figure out there's issues about H-1B visas. All these are actually around entrepreneurship and innovation. And I know Eric is very, very active in trying to go to Congress saying we need to get more people that are more capable. The fact of the matter that they come from different countries, it actually makes it better. It makes us richer in a way. But the government needs to take a proactive role. Does he mean it takes away opportunities from us? Well, I told you, don't use diversity or as an excuse. If you're good anywhere, right? And you need to stand by yourself tall with the innovation that comes from foreign countries. But I think there's a number of things that we can proactively support and try to give the government some of the insights of what makes this place a unique place that has been tried to be replicated around the world. But unfortunately for us, has not been successful in the other environments. So, any other questions? Yeah, Gonzalo.
My question is related to private equity and the exit strategy. That, for example, you got here in the U.S., your company is going up, and you can either do an IPO or Oracle can come and buy you, right? But in emerging markets, you don't have that dynamic. So I just wanted to know your insight in terms of exit strategy in those kind of markets.
Very good question. So when you talk about emerging markets and innovation and entrepreneurship, we don't have to go that far. Mexico, Canada, or even Peru for what it's worth. It starts with what you think you're creating. My belief is if you're building you need to recognize the fact that it's a global market. And the fact that you start in one place doesn't mean that that's the place you need to just stay. If you try to build a business that is only going to stay within that environment, your chances for exit and your chances to succeed they become exponentially less, right? That you won't have a lot of exits, and there you can go to be listed in a public market in a very small volume of a stock market that may not give you the returns you want. But I think in the context of emerging markets, what we're seeing in the VC community is getting very, very interested is going out to these markets to understand who's solving a global problem and to what degree I can enable that team to be able to access the global community. In certain cases, countries do not have the same, even though I was complaining a short moment about H-1 visas and other things that we're not being as proactive, etc. In other countries, we don't have the legislation to actually provide the tax incentives for businesses to be created. And so some specific regions are not only learning that it's not about money, it's about the role of government, is the role of how can they provide incentives for people to take those risks. Because I remember, if we would have stayed in Peru, we would have been working for one of the probably American companies, and luckily we could have become an executive here or not, but that was probably the best. But from an innovation and entrepreneurship, we probably would have been building a mom and pop business that it would have been a lifestyle. We would make good money, live well, but that's it, right? So I think it's a combination of things. It's a combination of things, and I think the successful emerging market entrepreneur will be the one that recognizes that the world is the market. It's not the market or the region where you're building it. And I think more and more, just because we're getting interconnected and information is being shared, we'll see more of that innovation come.
Mm-hmm. That was coming from an island that the Chinese go to for holiday.
Yeah.
And they IPO'd in the New York Stock Exchange.
Yeah.
And so that airline is too small to go anywhere else now. But they shot big, and eventually, because they're part of China, they're eventually probably going to be a world airline.
Yeah. So, there's many examples where you start in specific markets and you get to your exit locally. But, our stock markets do a lot of dual listings to do that. And even in the U.S., I will tell you, like Oracle went public in Japan again. Yeah, because they wanted to get into the Japanese market. And they said Yahoo went public in Japan again. There were a few exceptions, but it's not only one way, it goes the other. So you want to access the market, you incent local investors, they do that, you get listed, eventually you move on. But you're right, so in the context of innovation, you could actually, you should shoot the world for be in the market and try to, why not being listed in the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, or if for what it's worth, if Canada is giving you more incentives on the TSX, why not do that and eventually come and access the rest of the North American market? Yeah, absolutely. Any other questions?
We got time for one more.
Yes.
Like to start something, but we see things changing. For example, in Peru, there's now an agreement for trading in the United States.
Yes.
So is there like an incubator where we can go and learn and maybe explore a network that you?
Specifically in Peru, no, but what's his name? Jorge is going to tell you next time in a month from now, whenever the talk is. The government of Mexico is giving him money, and it's called it's like a business accelerator. It's a great deal. I think you pay $5,000, and they give you access to consultants, they give you access to office space, internet access, they give you business plans, templates, they give you everything. And the idea is that for the Mexican entrepreneur, not everybody gets, there's a lot of applicants, very few get through, but it's this Y incubator concept where you begin, launching into your business. So many governments are taking that proactive way. So a way for you to learn will be to get engaged and involved. They would love to be working or talking to a Google engineer or a Google something to see how can you collaborate. You can learn from that. So that's only one example. There's several of those that exist here in the Valley. Japan has several incubators here. Singapore has incubators here in the Valley. Unfortunately, the ones, Peru and all, are still not there yet, but there's a number of those. And actually, there's a group here called Y Incubator as well. There's a number of those that exist, and not only just here in the Valley, in multiple places. If you're interested, give me your card. I'll try to forward you a couple of those, and I think Jorge could be actually a good resource for you when it comes to figure out how they are trying to bring technology companies from the Mexican market into the U.S. market, and he has to provide all that infrastructure, all the way from how do you do a business plan, how do you do a marketing plan, how do you recruit directors, how do you sell your stuff, how do you set up a strategic relationship so that you don't have to be the one spending the money in selling, but another company will be the one reselling your products, etc. So I think your talk will be something that people would look forward to that. Yeah.
Exactly. And, just, Jorge Zavala is there. Jorge is going to be with us on September 18th talking about, Mexican startups and Tech VA. So thank you very much, Alberto, for being here with us. It was a great talk. Just a little bit.